All right, so the talk today that I have is about how to build connection in the learning environment clinically. I am Melissa Pereau. I'm the Residency Associate Training Director, and I do work with other departments, talking with them about how to connect with their learners and how to build curriculum that has people be engaged and interested. Okay, the goals for today, as I mentioned before, part of the goals is to address all of us as educators down to all the way down to the level of MS3. So an MS3 is about to become a fourth year medical student, and there's a ton of baby third years coming on in 6 weeks. And all of you that will become fourth years pretty quick here, it's your responsibility to teach them. And interns and residents, you've got students and attendings, you've got students and residents, and sometimes other allied health students as well. So the majority of us will need to teach somebody something at some point. And that is part of the goals for today, is looking at our roles as educators and how we can improve the way that we connect with people learning from us. We'll talk a little bit about something called the Connection Index that was designed by Dr. Pewter, look a little bit about where that came from and how it's been used, and look at the different aspects of it, things that are modifiable and that can be improved. And then also talk a little bit about innovative ways to connect with learners. And I think Priscilla is going to put a couple links in the chat so that you guys can get handouts. I think we also sent the handouts with the announcement. There are 2 different handouts. One of them is ideas and different kind of cool ways to spice up what you're doing with teaching. And another one has to do with resources. And we'll go over those a little bit later. I've got no financial interests or relationships to disclose. All right, so this is our publication from that just came out in November 2021 in Academic Psychiatry. Basically, in 2016, the larger institution was concerned about resident burnout as this became something that was more understood within the field of medicine. And pretty much every residency had access to a paid copy of the Maslach burnout inventory, and all of the residencies were having the residents take it and finding the results to be concerning, because that's what happens when you review burnout in physicians. And at that point in 2016, there wasn't a lot of data about what do you do about it. And since that time, there's like over 4,000 articles that you can find about preventing burnout, addressing burnout. But again, a lot of the studies, even today that exist, have mixed results about how you deal with burnout. And so what I was looking for back at as early as 2016 was, let's assume there are a lot of people who are burned out. What things can we modify specifically, concretely, that will help our residents feel less burned out, feels more psychologically safe in the training environment? And so I reached out to Dr. Pewter. He and his research team had developed something called the Connection Index, and it was a survey that was not the Maslach burnout inventory, a totally different survey, but it could pair with it. And so we had our residents who had already taken the burnout inventory also take the Connection Index. And we had the 50 different residents over the course of the 2 years, and we had them do it every 6 months, and they did it on all of their faculty interactions. So not just their one-on-one hourly supervision each week, but they did it also for attendings that they had been on night float with, attendings they had done rotations with. And so the residents all anonymously filled out the survey. And so none of the data was tracked back to the resident. But after we had done the survey twice, the residents asked, could we identify the supervisors rather than just talk about connection overall? And we said, sure. And we'll be able to use that information on the supervisors, where the residents' names are withheld and are anonymous, but we have the names of the supervisors, and we can be able to identify those supervisors which the residents feel are doing a phenomenal job and need a lot of praise and encouragement, and those supervisors that need more support, more time for supervision, need more help with, understanding what they're supposed to be doing during supervision, or even looking at how do we make this a better supervision interaction? How do we make this a safer environment? How do we address supervisors that the residents have concerns about? And so the hope in doing the Connection Index with our residents every 6 months was to see, can we identify supervisors that the residents are concerned about, and can we identify those that are doing phenomenal, and can we continue to improve how our supervision works on rotations, on call, and on one-on-one supervision. And so over the course of that time, this instrument that Dr. Puder and his team built was able to be validated and then used in a lot of different residencies throughout our system. And so Dr. Puder has gone residency to other departments and worked with their programs and worked with their supervisors. I created this talk actually for the Department of OBGYN for their faculty retreat, which I spoke at last year. And it's very interesting to see these results from our department versus other departments. And yet at the same time, there still are similar concerns with residents when it comes to connection and communication with their attendings. So the connection index is not the Maslach burnout inventory, but it is something that can be paired with it that shows you something that quantitatively, concretely can be addressed in order to improve burnout. And there is correlation between the connection index and the burnout inventory, which is the part that's really cool, because you can see by affecting specific aspects of the connection index, you can improve burnout scores. And that part was the part that I cared about when I went to Dr. Puder asking for help. The connection index has 4 different domains: empathy, psychological safety, feedback, and educational alliance. And we're going to look at those a little bit more today. And the questions that you did on the Kahoot survey were looking at all of these different areas. So the burnout inventory has 3 areas: emotional exhaustion, personal accomplishment, and depersonalization. None of these areas have anything in there that says, how do you improve them? They just say, this is where people are and how they're doing. The connection index looks at the training environment that our residents and our students are in and says, is this training environment optimal? Or are there things psychologically that are happening in the training environment that could be better? Empathy has to do with feeling heard and understood by the attendings that people work with and the residents that students work with. Psychological safety involves being able to speak up and ask questions or have disagreements on things and do that in a way that feels safe and they don't feel that there would be retribution. The ability to make mistakes and feel safe making mistakes and know that you will be given the benefit of the doubt. Feedback looks at the opportunity to work out answers for yourself and for learners to grow and improve based on being given information routinely and regularly rather than just one time during a rotation. And finally, Educational Alliance looks at what are our roles as members of the team and how do we show each other respect, how do we communicate better, and how does each person who's on this educational team serve their role better. So the connection index had one specific factor under psychological safety, this question. I would voice my concerns or questions with this person. And this one question specifically was important. And when you look at this emotional exhaustion on the burnout inventory, it's like most of us can look at these questions and go, yeah, okay, the answer is yes for most of these. And really then it is, how often is this? And as a program director, as an associate program director, my hope would be whatever the answer is for a given trainee, I would like to figure out, how do I make that come down? How do I make that go from a few times a week to once a week, a few times a month to just once a month? That certainly doesn't eradicate it, but it does address, how do I get this down? And how do I do this in a way that is relevant and has specific ways to do it? And that was the cool thing about the study and about this connection index, is it showed that those who strongly agreed that they could voice concerns or questions with their attending in their environment had a lower amount of emotional exhaustion by an entire measure, from a few times a week to just once a week. And that was important, that was relevant. And so looking at what is the environment that we're training our residents and our students, and how can we make this feel safer, and how do we do this concretely? Dr. Monica Geertz is, I would say, the reason why I went into psychiatry. She is a psychiatrist from the VA who is now retired, who is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life. She's probably 5'1", 5'2" German lady with like just all personality. Very passionate about geriatric psychiatry, has geriatric training, has training in psychopharmacology, and she ran the consult liaison service at the VA all through when I was a medical student, resident, and into me being an attending. When we would meet in her office, it would be a desk covered with giant stacks of paper everywhere. And on the walls, there were paintings covering every square inch of the walls, all the way up to the ceiling, that were made by patients, that were made by students, by residents, and it's just art everywhere. And it was just a really cool little kind of a hobbit hole room. And I'm always kind of drawn to faculty who have rooms like that. And my office pictured here is kind of designed after that in some ways. It was a place that I felt safe. It was a place that I wanted to learn. And working with Dr. Geertz was something that was incredibly positive for me. The hidden curriculum is something that is looked at throughout all of education, not just medical education. The hidden curriculum is things that learners are learning that is not intended. So when my 5-year-old goes to his kindergarten, he is learning how to write letters and how to write numbers, and he's learning about the life cycle of a tadpole, and he's learning about maps, but he's also learning what happens if you're mean to kids on a playground. Will they still play with you? Will the teacher intervene? And if you're nice to kids on the playground, what will happen? And what happens when you stick up for someone and help them? Or why is it important to sit in a circle and engage with all the other kids rather than rolling around on the floor like a 2-year-old? And so there's all kinds of things that are happening in his education day to day that's teaching him how to be a member of society, that's teaching him how to interact with other human beings in ways that are successful, and trying to disincentivize behavior that's not going to be successful. That is the hidden curriculum. And a lot of the hidden curriculum is not what schools are intending to teach, not what we're intending to teach within training medical students, residents, and graduate medical education. The hidden curriculum is how our actions and how the clinical learning environments factors can lead to residents learning how to behave, students learning how to behave. And a big part of this is, as educators, it is up to us to model for residents and model for students how to behave professionally, how to treat people with respect, how to become the doctor that we all want to be. On my best days, I would say, you know, I can get close to what I saw from Monica Geertz. And on my worst days, we're light years apart. And the hidden curriculum is how I teach students and how I teach residents to interact as a physician. Am I kind to nurses? Am I kind to members of the team? Do I treat others with respect? Do I value other people's opinions? Do I create an environment where people feel safe to learn? That hidden curriculum is just as important as everything that we're teaching our learners otherwise. And that hidden curriculum is something that oftentimes we don't even pay attention to as occurring. When Dr. Geertz would go around and do rounds, she would race through the whole hospital, patient to patient. We'd be in the ICU, then we'd be on a medical floor. And here's this little lady who just like runs up and interrupts in the middle of like a neurology rounds. And she just talks to the neurology attendant. She's like, do this and do that and do this other thing. And then she would like run over to the next team and she'd tell them, do this, do that, and don't do this because that's terrible. And here's some article about it. Next thing. And I would watch her, and every team she interacted with, they stopped, they paused, they weren't annoyed. They were like, oh, thank goodness this lady's coming in to fix everything. And she's the one that has the answers. They treated her with respect, and they were confident in her work. And it was really cool for me as a medical student to see a psychiatrist who was treated that way. And I didn't know that that was a thing. And so you would watch her go through the hospital and really have a lot of respect and know what she was doing. But there was other stuff she did too. As we went unit to unit, she knew at the end of the third floor, there was one social worker's office, that there'd be a bowl of chocolate on the desk. So we made sure we hit that office on our way. She knew that in McMillan's office, in nephrology, in the second cupboard, if you open that up, that was where the good stuff was, because McMillan would leave this chocolate literally for her. And she was like, because he appreciates that I don't like American chocolate that's full of sugar, and only the dark chocolate is worth eating. And so we would do these rounds, but then we would also kind of like do a miniature version of trick-or-treating throughout the entire VA. And every like 45 minutes, we would stop and we would sit down and we would have a piece of dark chocolate and we would breathe and we would talk to each other like human beings for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And then we would get up and we would go somewhere. That was hidden curriculum too. It was teaching, hey, you know what? We're people, and we need to pause, and we need to stop, and we need to reflect on what we're doing. And when you worked with her, you were seen. And it was a big part of what made me go, wow, I want to teach people and I want to be a good educator. And a lot of the discussion that we're going to go into the rest of this hour is looking at how do we modify this. The first of the domains from the connection index is empathy. I have a picture here of Albus Dumbledore from Harry Potter. I recognize that Albus Dumbledore is not a real person and that Harry Potter is not real on most days. It's pretty real to me the rest of the time. These are pretty much like real people in my brain in some ways. Albus Dumbledore is an amazing character because he's ridiculously busy. He's holding the whole world together as far as it comes to safety and protecting everybody from bad and keeping all the kids learning. But the cool thing about him is when he pauses and you're sitting in front of him, you are the only thing that matters. And it may only be for 5 minutes, but you are the only thing that matters. And it's very cool to see the way that this character treats the learners. He gives them his undivided attention. And even if it's 6 minutes and that's all it is, and then he's got to race off and like go save the world or whatever. When you're talking with him, when you're there, he gives you his time. He sees you. You are a human being to him. And there is incredible value in having an educator just say, hey, I'm listening and what you're saying is important. When it comes to empathy on rotations, being able to know the names of the people that work with you. And it seems like that should be something that's just a given. And yet I can say that this is difficult for me when I'm remembering the names of 20 patients, remembering the names of the students that are there for mornings for 2 weeks. And then the next 2 weeks, it's somebody else. I struggle to remember what month it is, like a lot. And that sounds really sad, but it's like really true. Or like what season it is sometimes. And yet, knowing people's names is really important. It shows them that they are valuable. It shows them that they're human beings. Being able to pay attention when others are giving presentations and not being on the phone. Being able to come in and say good morning and how are you doing, and asking trainees about their lives. And I'm not saying, get into their deep personal history or whatever, but, finding out about things that they enjoy or that they do for fun or hobbies or other interests, rather than just asking medical students, what do you want to go into? That's all everybody ever asks them. Why don't we ask them other things? Like, what are the things they value? What are the things they love to do in their spare time? There's other things that we can find out about trainees that would show that we have interest in them as human beings. And empathy is a huge part of that. And I think is very, very important to make sure that our learners are seen and are heard. If a learner is struggling, empathy also allows us to go, hey, in rounds the last couple of days, it's been pretty disorganized, or you've made a number of errors. And I'm wondering, are you doing okay? Are you all right as a human being? We all are behavioral health trained. So we can tell when people aren't doing well. And so being able to pause and just say, hey, are you doing okay? Rather than, hey, get it together. Whatever you did the last couple of days needs to be better for your level of training. You don't just say, hey, are you all right? I'm worried. And being able to do that in time that's one-on-one, just you and the learner, taking a pause. And I can say having residents who have done this with medical students is incredibly valuable. And having fourth-year medical students that have been able to do this with third-year medical students, also incredibly valuable. Being able to see one another and check in, very, very important. Psychological safety has to do with being able to express and to be yourself in a way that you are not fearful, in a way that there's not retribution, where you will be given the benefit of the doubt. When I do the 2-hour version of this lecture, I've got an awesome video that's like 5 minutes, and it's Yoda and Luke Skywalker. And the reason I've got this particular video, and I love this video, is it shows an example of psychological safety that's done really well. Here you have Luke Skywalker. He's marooned on a swamp planet. His friends are in danger. His spaceship is underneath a swamp water. He can't get it out. He's stuck. and he wants to try to use the force to raise the spaceship out of the water, and he can barely lift a rock with his mind using the force. And so he's frustrated and he's upset, and his teacher is there saying, okay, this is doable. And he's like, no, it's not. You don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, no, seriously, this is doable. And you've got Luke Skywalker saying, fine, I'll try. And then you have Yoda saying, no, there is no try, like, just go do it. And it's amazing because this entire segment is pretty much just Luke Skywalker having like a bratty pouty moment. Whereas the learner, he's like, this is impossible. Nobody can do this. And then he goes and like sits under some trees and just is like frustrated. And in this scene, at no point does Yoda say, wow, you just haven't read or learned enough yet, and this is your fault. Or, hey, I would expect any other learner at your level of education to already know how to raise a spaceship. Or, it's clear to me that all of your time and effort isn't being spent in becoming a better force user or whatever. Like, there's no aspect in this interaction that is, let's belittle the learner. What Yoda does is he pauses and he's like, all right, I've got a powder over here under the trees. And then he just raises the spaceship himself. When my kid is struggling to tie his shoes, if I come over and say, any other kid already knows how to do this, why don't you know how to do this? Or why haven't you learned how to do this thing that everybody else should be able to do? All of the different things that as attendings or as residents, we've said at some point or another to a student that was really struggling. Those things don't help people learn. Belittling somebody or showing that we are disappointed in a person because of their lack of knowledge, that doesn't help anybody learn. People learn through example. And if instead, as an educator, you have someone that is below your level of training and you're teaching them how to do something and you're like, hey, let me show you. It's actually not difficult for me because I've been doing this for a while now. This is how you do the thing. This is how you talk to the family and get them to agree to ECT. This is how you get the patient to sign the consent for the medication. This is how you are able to use this medicine to fix this other medicine. Let me show you how to do this. A psychologically safe environment is one where the learner can make mistakes and it's okay, where the learner can fail and it's okay, where the learner is able to ask questions and it's okay, and where the trainee has the benefit of the doubt rather than, why did you order 500 of Clozaril instead of 50 of Clozaril? Were you trying to kill somebody? You'll say, you had a lot going on yesterday. This is not something you did intentionally. This is something that was a mistake, and let's figure out how we can prevent this in the future. I watch a lot of cooking shows, and there's this one cooking show where they do restaurants that are failing, and they have a chef come into the restaurant that's failing, and you've got these restaurants that are scary, like they've got like rats running through it, or they've got like, food that's really old and bad and they're still serving it, like scary, terrible disasters because they're on television and that's what people want to see. And so you have this chef that comes into this restaurant, real life restaurant that's about to go under, and the chef comes and talks to the restaurant owner, and the goal of the show is they have like 1 week to get a whole team to come in and fix the restaurant and fix the back of the house to make the restaurant successful, change the menu, do a trial of it and have people come in and see how their service staff does. And you've got 1 week, high stress, high intensity to completely redo this restaurant. The thing that's really cool about these shows is on the very first day when this professional chef comes into the restaurant, the chef doesn't come in and say, look at all the terrible things that you've done and how you've failed so terribly and you have rats in your place and you should be ashamed of yourself. The chef who's been hired to come in to fix this restaurant always uses this wording. What are we doing that's having people not come back anymore? What things have we kind of let fail over time? What things do you think we could really be doing to get the community better engaged in what you're doing in your restaurant? It's all we. And it's a really cool thing because all of a sudden you have this person who's coming in, and with the use of the word we, what things can we do to make sure that these orders are put in the right way every day? What things do you think we can do to make sure that in the afternoon, all of the patients get seen and nobody gets missed? The notion of using we makes it a safe environment for then talking with a resident or with a student about how something can be improved as part of a team and part of what we are all doing together. I really like this, and I think this is a safe way of communicating. I remember there was one day where I was stretched beyond belief. I was covering like 5 things at the same time. And I was struggling to get everything done. And I was racing around, and I needed to be across the street already to see some patient that was going to be discharged from one of the programs. And I'm on inpatient, and I'm getting ready to leave, and I've got my bag in my hand. And all of a sudden, medical student looks up at me and says, "Can I ask a question?" And I look at the student thinking, you've already heard me like take calls and answer, a bunch of questions and do a bunch of other stuff. And you can tell I've got my bag and I'm getting out the door. And I really think I'm like being crushed today, but I'm looking at her little eyeballs, and she looks up and says, I have a question. And I'm like, and I sit back down. I said, yeah, what's your question? And I'm trying to make like this thing that's just roiling me that says, go, 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 go. Like, just be quiet for a second. And she said, these are the 3 patients I'm seeing. Which of these patients do you think it would be helpful for me to be praying with? And it was not an inappropriate question at all, because one of the patients had hyper religiosity through the roof and was wanting to talk to the chaplain all the time. And her question was very valid. Another was a mother who had just lost a child. I mean, she had 3 difficult patients, and her question was relevant. Her question was valid. And all of a sudden she asked me this question, and I'm like, this is what I'm doing here. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm literally doing this right now, is to help this person learn how to provide whole person care. And yeah, I got a lot of stuff I got to get done. But you know what? I can take 6 minutes for this, and I will find the 6 minutes later in the day. Because at the end of the day, the work always gets done. And right now, in this minute, this is really important. And if I'm pissed off or I'm annoyed with this student right now, as I try to answer this question, I'm going to mess up some stuff. I need to just pause and slow my roll. And I can explain to her in 6 minutes or less which patients it would be great to pray with, and which patients let's probably avoid doing that, and give her praise for asking the question, and have a little bit of time for myself to reflect on, hey, you know what, you're forgetting why you're here. And that was one of those moments that I keep a lot and try to remember, like, the things that I do for my patients are important, but the things I do with the people that I teach and I train also really matter. And the way I communicate with them, the way the space that I create so that people can ask questions, so people can say, why did you choose this medicine instead of this other medicine? I want people to ask those questions. I want people to feel safe to speak up and say, why did you do this versus that? And not feel like they're going to get their head bitten off. Psychological safety is not only living our values as human beings, but also modeling that for other people. I thought about for a long time, I haven't ever yelled at a resident that I can think of. I haven't ever said things to a resident that I can remember that I thought were terribly disparaging or rude. Maybe I have, and for that, I obviously feel awful. But I can think back over time and be like, I really don't know that there was a moment that I've said anything that was really rude to a student or a resident. And yet I can pause and I can remember a time when there was a patient that needed ECT, and the nursing staff fed the patient the morning of ECT, and the patient didn't get to get treatment. And it was an accident, but it was, written on the chart, and there was orders, and this patient really needed to start ECT. And now we were going to have to wait 2 more days because the patient was fed. And here I am in this room, and the nursing staff comes in and they said, yeah, we fed this person. And my instantaneous reaction was, who did this? Whose fault was this? Who didn't do what their job was? And this is a big deal. This is going to affect patient care. We need to write this up. And I literally said all of those things. And I remembered being a kid going to restaurants, and my dad was one of those people that like 90% of the time wants to talk to the manager about something that they don't like about their food just because they like to complain. And I remember growing up, and there was nothing ever said toward me that was bad. There was nothing, he wasn't rude to us, but we hated going out to dinner with him because we're just on pins and needles the whole time, because at some point something's not going to be right and he's going to complain to the manager. It's going to be really embarrassing and awful, and we hate it. And so the entire meal we're uneasy waiting for him to complain. And I realized I can be as nice as I want to the residents and the students, but if I'm rude to the nursing staff, if I'm rude to the rest of the team, I'm creating an environment that's not safe for somebody else. And if they see me be rude to somebody else, why wouldn't I be rude to them? And so I'm modeling something for trainees and for learners that is a double standard. I'm going to be nice to you, but I'm not going to be nice to other people. And it's like, that doesn't work at all. That just replicates what I've already known. And it's like, okay, so not only living our values, but creating a model where people feel heard and feel safe and can make mistakes, and not just giving trainees the benefit of the doubt, but giving the benefit of the doubt to the rest of the people who work with us on the team. All right, feedback. So as we saw in our little survey, none of us give feedback, or many of us do not give feedback as often as we need. And so giving feedback needs to be something that's occurring pretty frequent. And not just things to improve. I think for me, it's really easy to tell a resident, hey, make sure that you add this smart phrase to the thing, or make sure that you change the chief complaint every day because you didn't change it, or hey, make sure, so I'll mention the things that they need to fix. But it's pretty rare for me to read a subjective that's really been done well. And I'm like, wow, that encapsulates that patient perfectly. Like, whoa, I read that and I'm like, whoa, this person needs to be in the hospital. They did a really good subjective. How often do I text that resident and be like, that was a great subjective? I don't. And that's awful. I don't want to do that. I'm able to remind them of the things they need to fix, but I don't also remind them of the things that they just did awesome. I was working Thanksgiving 4 days in a row a number of years ago with one of our now third years. And he worked with me all 4 days in a row. And it was great to have a moonlighter that was the same person. And he did a great job. And one of the chief residents contacted me on like the second or third day and was like, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, it's going great. And I said, the Sith is doing a phenomenal job getting all the stuff done. And it's nice to have the same resident every day. And Hans, who was the chief, was like, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Did you tell Sith? And I'm like, no. Oh, no, I didn't. And it would have been very easy for me to just text him and say, man, it was great to have you here both days. And you did such a good job on all those notes. I barely had to add anything to them. That was really nice because it's a lot of patience. Positive feedback is important and we don't always remember. Scheduling time for feedback is important because otherwise we don't. And we'll talk in a couple minutes here about something Dr. Roll is doing with feedback that I think is pretty amazing. But I think for all of us, regardless of what our style is, at least having once or twice a week where we've protected a little bit of time, Fridays for 10 minutes before we're done with rounds, let's just talk about the stuff that we want you guys to be doing better and the things that you're doing really well. That doesn't cost very much, and it allows the learner to keep learning and to keep getting better. And without that feedback, they don't get to learn about what things they could be doing better or what things they're doing well and to keep doing. That feedback is very, very important. I don't think that we do it good enough, and we just give feedback on the last couple of days at the end of the rotation. As a medical student, I knew that. And so I knew that you only had to do a super good job the last 4 days of the rotation, and that was it. And it wasn't that I did a bad job the rest of the time, but I really stepped up my game the last 3 to 4 days because the attending didn't even remember anything beyond that 3 to 4 days. And it was true. So I think being able to give all of our learners feedback more frequently is very, very important. Last area, educational alliance. So we have to be able to work together as a team, as the attending giving the goals and objectives, as the resident being able to understand what my role is and what am I supposed to be doing, as the medical student understanding what my role is and how I provide value. This is something where as an educator, I fall short a lot because I have a tendency to come in and just tell everybody what to do and then storm out and go to the next thing, rather than slowing down and saying, hey guys, this is what I'm hoping that you'll learn. This is what I would like to see happen every week. Medical students, this is what's expected of you. And this is what you guys should expect of me. And this is how we're going to do this. Like, I do that very poorly. And having those goals and objectives at the beginning is important. Laying all that out is important, and giving the learners time to make up their own treatment plans, to act with autonomy. That's very, very important. Is our goal to have residents that can replicate the medicines we would choose? Or is the goal to have a resident that uses critical thinking and can take the training from me and from the VA people and from SAC and from DBH and put it all together and say, based on all of these different cool clinicians, this is what I think would be a great idea for this patient right now. That's what we're trying to do. We're not just trying to get them to parrot back what we would do. And so letting them have autonomy, letting them be able to propose what they'd like to do and then going with it if it's appropriate, that's important. This I have made, and for those interested in the slides, we can get these to you. Also, this recording will be available. This is something I've made showing that no matter what stage of training, there are things that you can do to be a good educator. For our interns and for medical students, knowing the names of the other people, being able to make sure that the learners are asking questions, giving praise, that's basic stuff, but you have to absolutely do this with intent. For our residents, considering what stressors students are under, very important to ask students why they want to do things and what their differential diagnosis and what their thought process is. And you know what, that takes time. And we have 50 billion things going on. Sometimes we don't use the time that way. And that's the same for your attendings. And that's part of why we're here. And we have to build in that time. And I know it's hard when the time is really stretched. And so finding shorter, quicker ways to do this, not a bad idea. Looking at shorter presentations or presentations focused on differential. There's tons of tips and tricks on this. And I've got a whole handout for you guys that looks at some of this. Feedback, again, important, scheduled. And then finally being able to have goals and expectations for each person and how they function on the team, where those are communicated, ends up helping people understand where they are and how they're doing so that they can feel so psychologically safe, so that they do know what's expected of them. And that part is very, very important. What does disconnection look like in mental health education, right? Because I do this talk for like surgeons and for primary care doctors, and it's a different thing. Like at least when we're talking about behavioral health, the level of toxicity that you sometimes can see in other specialties isn't as high. And that's good, honestly, but there's still interactions we have with learners that are still toxic, that can still be better. And so we've gone over a lot of these things already, but this is in one table. What does it look like when we're not at our best? And I can say in each of these categories, I hit one or two of these all the time. And being able to slow down and have intent and keep these things in mind is very, very important. So this is an example of what it looks like to not do this well, so that we can then remember what we want to be doing and what our goals are. This video, I wish I have time to show, but I don't. And this basically is a section from The Sound of Music that shows the father of these children basically treating them like they're in the military and calling them to do things by using a whistle and having them line up, and they're all sad little military children and their father's not like teaching them or engaging or connecting with them. That is probably my greatest failing oftentimes. And it's something that I actively try to work on, not just coming in and bossing everybody else around and then taking off, taking time to ask questions, taking time to ask learners what they think about the case and what they want to do rather than just saying what I want. Changing the environment to be one that there's teamwork, that there is safety, that the learners are able to make mistakes is very, very important. And if we don't do that with intent, then it doesn't happen. And we get to model what we want things to look like for the next generation of providers. You don't have to agree. You can use conflict. We have a number of our attendings that actually would like for residents to push back a little bit and kind of debate it. And it can be safe. It can be done safely, as long as psychological safety is present. Quick shout out for Dr. Lee, who for many, many years has been doing vulnerability rounds. And since not being on the consult liaison rotation, it's something that, you know, I'm sad that our residents are not getting from him, and I'm trying to find ways to build this into other engagements he's got with our residents, because I think they're really valuable. He would do this at the beginning of the day on consult liaison, and every person on the team, including the medical student and including the resident, would have time, and it's very brief, 30 seconds, 60 seconds of things that they did in their life or things that they were excited about and things that they were frustrated about or worried about. And this is not a psychotherapy session. This is just human beings talk about vulnerability and being human beings in front of each other for a moment. And Dr. Lee would be able to be there with them and say, you know, I'm really frustrated about, you know, this consult that isn't getting better, or I'm really frustrated about this thing that happened at my church. And it could be a very minimal, quick thing, but at the same time, every member of the team is treated equally. There is no hierarchy in vulnerability rounds, and each person is seen and heard. This is a very cool thing. It doesn't take more than 10 minutes at the start of the day. Dr. Roll does this cool thing where at the end of each week, this is what he does. He does 1 hour at the end of each week where he gets the students and the residents and him. And these are feedback rounds. I used to think of this as like feedback battle royale or something where it's like, I don't know, this sounds like kind of confrontational, where the students first say to each other, here's some things that you're doing great, and here's some things that will make you a better student, which already is like, oh my gosh, that's really uncomfortable. How do we do that? And yet he creates an environment where this is encouraged, where it's like, no, we're coaching each other. And so, hey, if you got in 10 minutes earlier, you would like have more together. It's a time of rounds word, but like in a nice way. If when you're talking with your patients, if you got at their eye level, it might help or whatever. Students can then give their team feedback if they're resident and give him as the attending feedback. And then they get their feedback. Then the students leave and the residents get to do the same thing with one another and with their attending. And then they get their feedback. And then finally, he gets to tell the residents about how he thinks that they're doing. But the attending is asking for feedback. Again, encouraging dismissal of the hierarchy. As much as possible, getting rid of the hierarchy is helpful. Check out the handout. This question, what if I'm too burned out to care about being a good teacher? I get this almost every single time that I do the lecture. Please check out this Wellness Live presentation I did about finding joy as an educator. The link is here and we'll get you guys the slides, but it's a whole separate talk about if I'm burned out, I'm not going to be able to be a good educator for other people that are burned out. And so, you know, we have to work on the health and wellness of the educators as well. The handout that has been sent to all of you goes into details of what resources and what support exists for our residents, for our students, and for our attendings as far as help when we are struggling and resources that exist within our system. Please check those things out as well.